Hello everyone. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about the interspeaker variation in high front vowel merger and split in Hong Kong English. Hong Kong is a special administrative region of China, which used to be a British colony for more than 150 years. The official languages of Hong Kong are English and Chinese. Around half of the population in Hong Kong speak English, and most of them are English, Cantonese, Mandarin trilinguals. English is widely used in Hong Kong in different sectors as well as in written communication. Hong Kong English is the local variety of English spoken in Hong Kong with its unique phonology, syntax, and lexicon. One of the very interesting phonological features of Hong Kong English is the lexical tone. So the words for and for have different tones and therefore they are pronounced differently in Hong Kong English. We also have some really interesting slangs and vocabularies like laugh die me, which means that something is really funny, or jang, which means that something is really cool, really great, really fun. So the aim of my current study is to investigate the interspeaker variation in the production of high front vowels in Hong Kong English. I want to find out the relevant social factors that lead to interspeaker variation in Hong Kong English, which includes the speaker demographics, language ideology, and language experience. Also, I want to broaden our understanding of Hong Kong English phonology by examining whether the current analysis on Hong Kong English vowel system is accurate. In this study, I will focus on the fleece and kid vowels, the two high front vowels in Hong Kong in English. According to the current analysis, there is a merger of kid vowel to fleece vowel in Hong Kong English, so the words heat and heat are pronounced the same in Hong Kong English. However, these studies do not consider the effect of linguistic environment on the merger, and I argue that in reality, the high front vowels in Hong Kong English are much more complicated than that. In fact, I hypothesize that the kid vowel in Hong Kong English undergoes one split and one merger, which are phonologically conditioned. And that would be firstly the seed-sig split, and then second, the seed-seed merger. So firstly, in the seed-sig split, the kid vowel splits into two classes, which is realized as I before velar consonants and E before other consonants. Therefore, the words seed and sig have different vowels in Hong Kong English. Then, for the seed-seed merger, the kid vowel merges with the fleece vowel before non-velar consonants, but they remain distinct phonemes before velar consonants. Therefore, the words seed and seed sound the same in Hong Kong English, but not seed and sig, which are different. This table shows the pronunciation of the high front vowels in Hong Kong English and Standard English using American English as an example. As you can see here, Hong Kong English and the American English have the same pronunciation for fleece vowel as well as kid vowels before velar consonants. And the only difference between these two varieties is the pronunciation of the kid vowel before non-velar consonants. So in Hong Kong English, it's pronounced as E, which is the same as the fleece vowel, but in American English, it's pronounced as the I, which is the same as the kid vowel before velar consonants. Then I want to have an introduction on how previous studies approach variation in Hong Kong English. So one of the main research direction is called English as a Second Language Study, or ESL study. And according to this study, due to the fact that most English speakers in Hong Kong are L2 speakers, they often have the assumption that native speaker English is the only standard in Hong Kong, and therefore all English speakers in Hong Kong must treat the native speaker English, which is the standard American or British English, as their goal, as their standard, as their ideal. And according to these studies, Hong Kong English does not exist, and the so-called features of Hong Kong English are just pronunciation mistakes and grammatical errors. And according to them, the cause of variation in Hong Kong English is differences in language proficiency and language aptitude. So some people have a lower proficiency and lower aptitude, and therefore they have more pronunciation mistakes, and whereas some people have a higher proficiency and higher aptitude, and therefore they can master English phonology and stop having pronunciation mistakes. However, I would argue that one really main problem with this approach is that in reality, not all L2 speakers in Hong Kong aim for native speaker English. In fact, Hanson Edwards 2019 argued that a third of her respondents chose Hong Kong English to be their preferred English varieties. So in reality, not all Hong Kongers treat American or British English as their standard. And therefore, not adopting features of native speaker English does not equal to poor language aptitude or low proficiency. Then there are also other studies that take a more pluralistic view of English, like Snyder's dynamic model. According to him, English in former colonies would undergo different stages of development, which leads to the establishment of local English varieties that are different from the original British or American English. And according to these studies, Hong Kong is in stage 3, where there is a development of local linguistic features, and even though English has become an identity marker in Hong Kong, it still carries stigma and is not accepted as the norm. However, I would like to point out one thing is that not all Hong Kongers view English in the same way, because according to Hanson Edwards 2019 again, people in Hong Kong have diverse attitude towards English. And since these models often treat Hong Kong English as just one single thing, they often fail to account for the inter-speaker variation in language production and language attitude. And there are also some studies that try to take a more variationist approach to Hong Kong English, and they find out there is actually both inter-speaker and intra-speaker variation in Hong Kong English, and it is found in terms of both consonantal and suprasegmental variation. And there are some factors that they found that affects variation in Hong Kong English, which would include intra-speaker style shifting, or in terms of inter-speaker difference, there would be differences in language proficiency and language aptitude, just like what the ESL study suggests, and also the differences in education level. According to this study, there is a continuum of English in Hong Kong. On the one hand, we have the very stereotypical Hong Kong English, and on the other hand, we have the standard English. So when there is informal speech, or when the speaker has a low proficiency or low education level, they would use more features of Hong Kong English. On the other hand, when there is formal speech, or when the speaker has a higher proficiency and higher education level, they will use fewer features of Hong Kong English and more features of standard American or British English. Therefore, in this study, I'm curious on whether other social factors may influence inter-speaker variation in Hong Kong English, especially about language attitude and language experience. And I hypothesize that language proficiency and attitude might not be the only determining factors for inter-speaker variation in Hong Kong English. In this study, I drawn the data from a larger sociolinguistic study on Hong Kong English, which includes 39 speakers that are aged between 18 to 58, and that includes 22 female speakers and 17 male speakers. They are all Cantonese English bilinguals who are born and raised in Hong Kong. There are 3 parts to my sociolinguistic study. Firstly, they had a sociolinguistic interview, which is followed by a word list and followed by a minimal pair reading task. For this study, I gathered the demographic and attitudinal information of my participants from the sociolinguistic interview, and I gathered the vowel production data from the word list reading task. These are the information that I gathered during the sociolinguistic interview, which includes the age and gender of the speaker, and also language affiliation, which refers to what kind of English they think they speak. Because some people in Hong Kong think that they speak Hong Kong English, and some think that they speak American English, and that refers to language affiliation. And then I also asked them about the language orientation, which is about the kind of English that they want to speak. Because in Hong Kong, some people want to speak Hong Kong English, and others want to speak American or British English, so that's what I mean language orientation here. And I also gathered information about attitude towards Hong Kong English, their education level, and also their exposure to other varieties of English in terms of their social network, media consumption, and living abroad experience. Then, in terms of my experimental setup, there were 30 monosyllabic words with fleece and keep vowels in velar versus non-velar environments, and each word was repeated 3 times, so there would be a total of 90 tokens per speaker. The words were embedded in a carrier phrase, and they were presented in a pseudo-random order. Then, in terms of data analysis, the recordings of the word list reading tasks were transcribed in ELAN and aligned using Montreal Force Aligner. Then, the vowel boundaries were adjusted manually in Prague, and then the vowel formants were extracted at the 1/3 point of vowel duration. Then, the tokens of all monophthongs in the word list, not just the fleece and keep vowels, were extracted, which results in more than 400 tokens per speaker. And the reason why I extracted all monophthongs is for me to conduct the vowel normalization using the Lobanov method. Here shows the result of my acoustic analysis, firstly with the SID-6 split. So according to this graph that we can see here, the KIT vowel shows the effect of following velar sounds but not the fleece vowel. The KIT vowel that are followed by velar consonants have a higher F1 and lower F2 than the KIT vowel followed by non-velar consonants. Therefore, my hypothesis of the SID-6 split in Hong Kong English is supported. Then, in terms of the SID-SID merger, the KIT and fleece vowels only show the sign of merger in non-velar environment, but not in a velar environment. And also, as we can see here from this graph, this is not a complete merger because the F1 and F2 values of the 2 vowels only partially overlap in the non-velar context. But still, my hypothesis of the SID-SID merger is supported. And this graph shows the formants of both fleece and KIT vowels in the 2 contexts, the non-velar and velar context. And as we can see here, the formants of the Cleese vowel and Keat vowel before velars do not vary much across the speakers, but then for the Keat vowels that occur before non-velar consonants, it shows a great inter-speaker variation, and the formant values are somewhere in between the Cleese vowel and the Keat vowel before velars. And this result is actually expected because we know that this is the only context in which the hyphen vowel is pronounced differently in Hong Kong English and the standard native speaker English or American or British English. And therefore, I'm very curious on whether the social factors would influence the interspeaker variation of this Keat vowel in the non-velar context. Then I will present to you the findings of the social variables of my participants. Firstly, this graph shows the age and gender distribution of my 39 participants. And as you can see here, speakers from a wide range of age and gender groups are represented. Then, for language affiliation, around half of my participants identify themselves as speakers of Hong Kong English, and then for 36% of them, they identify themselves as a speaker of a mix of Hong Kong English and standard American or British English, and the rest of them identify themselves as speaker as only standard American or British English and not a speaker of Hong Kong English at all. Then, for language orientation, we see a very different pattern here because we can see that the majority of the participants see the native speaker English, the American, British, or Canadian English as their ideal, and only 1/3 of the participants treat the Hong Kong English as their ideal. Then, there are also a few participants who treat the mix of Hong Kong English and standard American and British English as their ideal. Then, in terms of latitudes towards Hong Kong English, I created a numerical scale that measures how their attitudes are towards Hong Kong English, which is based on the following 9 criteria. So based on their response in the interview, I will count how many points they gave during the interview. And this graph shows the result, which shows that there is a really wide range of attitudes among my speakers. And overall, there is a slightly negative attitudes towards Hong Kong English. And also one very interesting thing is that the attitude often co-varies with language orientation. So for people with a negative attitude, they usually treat the standard native speaker English as their ideal, whereas for people with a positive attitudes, they most often treat Hong Kong English as their ideal. Then, in terms of education level, most of my participants had an undergraduate education, and there are a few who had non-university tertiary education, like vocational training or higher diploma, and some of them have postgraduate education, like PhD or master's. Then, this graph shows the level of exposure to other varieties of English in terms of social network. So I also created a scale to measure how much exposure they have to other varieties of English in terms of their social network. And the score is determined by the type of relationship between my participants and the speakers who are non-speakers of Hong Kong English. So if they are co-workers at work, they will have a lower score, but if they are family members, they will receive a higher score. Then, in terms of media consumption, I also created a scale from 0 to 2. So for people who get a 0 in the score, it means that they don't really consume any media in other varieties at all. And then for people who have a score of 2, it means that they consume British or American media regularly, like TV shows or songs, etc. And lastly, in terms of living abroad experience, I also created a scale from 0 to 2. And as you can see here, the vast majority of my speakers have never lived abroad in an English-speaking environment, and there are a small minority of them who have lived abroad in an English-speaking environment for more than 3 months, which are only 7 of them. Then here I'm showing the result of the different social variables on their vowel production. So firstly, this is the effect of gender on vowel production. As you can see here in this graph, female speakers show a slightly more split for the seed-6 split than male speakers. And then for the seed-seed merger, the female and male speakers somehow show very similar degree of merger, so I can't really tell which one is more merged and which one is not. And then for the effect of age, I don't really find an effect of age for the split because the seed and sig words are basically split across all speakers. But then I can see an effect of age for the seed-seed merger because older speakers are more merged than younger speakers. Then, in terms of the effect of language affiliation, I found out that those people who identify themselves as speaker of Hong Kong English would show more seed-6 split than those who identify themselves as speaker of other varieties. And a very similar pattern occurs for seed-seed merger as well, because those people who identify themselves as Hong Kong English speakers show more merger than those who don't. And then, for language orientation is also quite similar, because those people who treat Hong Kong English as their ideal show more seed-6 split than those who treat the native speaker English as their ideal. And also, for the seed-seed merger, those who treat Hong Kong English as their ideal show more merger than those who don't. And then in terms of attitudes, this is quite interesting because for the seed-6 split, there's no effect of attitude at all. But then, in terms of the seed-6 merger, those people who have a positive or a very extremely negative attitudes show more merger than those who have a slightly negative attitudes, which is quite confusing. Then, in terms of education level, I found out that those with university level education show less seed-6 split than those with a lower level of education. But then for the seed-6 merger, I don't really find an effect of education level at all. Then, in terms of the exposure to other varieties of English, I found quite an interesting effect of social network, because in terms of the seed-6 split, people who are more exposed to other varieties of English through social network have less split, and those people also have considerably less merger than those people who are exposed to fewer speakers of other varieties of English. Quite a similar pattern occurs for media consumption at all, because people who consume more media in other varieties show less merger for the seed and seed words, but then for the seed-6 split, I don't really find an effect of media consumption. And lastly, in terms of living abroad experience, those people who have lived abroad show less seed-6 split and less seed-seed merger than those who never live abroad. So basically, this is a summary of what I found. So basically, if you are female speakers and you identify yourself as a speaker of Hong Kong English and you treat Hong Kong English as your ideal and have less interaction with non-Hong Kong English speaker and have a lower education level and never live abroad, you will be more likely to show more seed-6 split, and vice versa for less seed-6 split. Then for the seed-seed merger, the pattern is quite similar to the one for the seed-6 split, and the only difference is the one for age and attitude and consumption of media, because here I can see an effect of age, so older speakers and people with very positive or extremely negative attitudes towards Hong Kong English, or those people who don't consume non-Hong Kong English media at all, they will show more mergers than those who are the opposite. So from what I see here from my results, I conclude that the seed-6 split and the seed-seed merger may carry indexical meaning in Hong Kong, and especially they may index language affiliation and language orientation. And also, since we see that the split and the merger have a slightly different distribution, it means that these two sociolinguistic variables may have slightly different indexical meanings. And also, I found out that exposure to other varieties of English would influence vowel production, especially towards the side of more standard English, and the effect is especially strong through social network rather than the media consumption. And lastly, I found out that the variants are gradient in nature. So the kid vowel in the non-filler context is variably realized along a continuum from E to A, but not categorical between this or that, but a continuum in between. I would like to address some of the limitation of my studies. So one main problem is that I have too many social variables and it's quite hard for me to disentangle the effect of each of them. Ideally, I would need a larger sample size to actually test the statistical significance, but we know that it's not feasible in real life because it would take you forever to analyze. And also, one problem with my dataset is that the age and gender of my speaker is not evenly distributed because the older male speakers are quite underrepresented in my data. And also, the distribution of education level is also quite uneven because most of my speakers are college graduates, and in order for me to actually test the effect of educational level, I would need to find more people who don't have a university education. And also, my data on media exposure is not detailed enough, and if I really want to study the effect of media exposure, I should ask more detailed questions during the interview, which could be a potential future direction for my research. So for my next step of this study, I should first finish coding the social variables for a few remaining speakers, and also quantify the acoustic difference of the vowels across different contexts, like by using P-line score. And also, I should combine some of the variables that covariate to simplify my analysis, like maybe I should combine attitude towards Hong Kong English and language orientation. Also, I want to examine if there is any interaction effect in between the different social variables, and I should also run statistical models to test the significance of my result. And lastly, for my future research, I would like to analyze the data from my sociolinguistic interview and the MINMO pair task as well, so that I can compare the performance of my speakers across these three tasks. And also, it is also possible for me to maybe examine other harder vowels in Hong Kong English as well and see if they have the same pattern as the fleece and kid vowels in my study. So this is the end of my presentation, and these are the references that I have. So thank you so much.